Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. You know what time it is. You know what it's all about. We're looking at college football last week, and it was a very interesting week of college football. It was a very fun week of college football for me. But how about for the Seahawks fan? The Seahawks fan who doesn't really have a strong rooting interest. So I kept an eye on the many interesting prospects around college football, and here's what I came up with in the positive for the positions that I'm keeping an eye on for this upcoming draft. So let's start with quarterback. Let's go with quarterback here. A couple of new entries into the list this week. So we're going to start with Shedeur Sanders. He's been here before. I know he blew it at the end. I know he made two really bad plays that cost them the game, but I can't be that critical of Shedeur Sanders for playing like this and losing a game in overtime because his defense is that bad. 400 yards, 5 touchdowns. The pick came at the worst possible time, but he continues to show he's going to be a really intriguing pro prospect. Almost 50 rushing yards, 7 of his completions went for 17 or more yards. He's got such a great arm. He's got such a great understanding of how to read a defense. I know he's unlikely to come out in this draft, but you know what? He's worth watching because 2025, he's going to be there. 2025, he's going to be in the conversation for maybe going number one overall. And if we scout him out now, less work to do later. Second quarterback is new to this list. I talked about him before the season started, however, and he just hasn't really played that great, but he finally had a nice game. Grayson McCall for Coastal Carolina, 19 to 28, 373 yards, so he was hitting a lot of big plays, a lot of long plays, 2 touchdowns. 8 of his completions went for 15 or more yards, 77.7 PFF grade. Good game for Grayson McCall. I had to have both quarterbacks from the Washington-Oregon game on this list. Penix didn't have his... In fact, actually, fun fact, both these quarterbacks had their lowest graded PFF game from this year in this game, which obviously that's ignoring, I think, the magnitude of the moment and the magnitude of the opponent, but fun little fact there. Penix did not have his best game, but to people who are trying to figure out Penix, what he did at the end of that game when he was in serious pain should go a long way in proving some positive qualities about this guy. This guy is tough, and this guy is clutch. So, 302 yards, 4 touchdowns, 1 interception that wasn't his fault at all. The receiver fell down. 22 of 37 isn't great, but again, he played a lot of that fourth quarter with bad cramps and found a way. 8 completions of 17 or more yards. He threw the game-winning touchdown pass, 76.1 grade. And I got to throw Bo Nix in there as well. Now, Bo Nix had 3 opportunities to put this game away on fourth down, and he failed all 3 times. And you can say the coaches shouldn't have put him in that position. They shouldn't have gone for it on fourth down. I might agree with 1 or 2 of those, but the players need to execute too. But other than that, Bo Nix played a really great game. 75% completion, 337 yards, 2 touchdowns. Hits a couple of deep throws down the field, although that doesn't seem to be the crux of his game at this point. He is somebody who is really good at hitting short stuff. Had 7 carries for 14 yards, 74.3 PFF grade. Still a really good game. And that game, the way that it went, I just had to have both quarterbacks here. New name, Spencer Rattler finally had a good game, and like Shedeur, he blew it at the end. He threw an interception that cost his team the game. But before then, he was lights out. 23-30, 313 yards, ran for almost 50 yards. 8 of his completions went for at least 20 yards. 90.1 PFF grade. He's not playing a terrible team either, by the way. He's playing Florida. They're not good, but they're not that bad. Okay, so those are your quarterbacks. Let's move along here to the tight ends. And some familiar faces here. Cade Stover is just here every week because every week he's doing stuff. 4 catches, 53 yards, 2 touchdowns. Ohio State did a pretty good job running the ball, 4.5 yards a carry almost. He allowed 1 QB pressure and pass protection, but his PFF grade was excellent, 84.1. One of his best games of the year. Jaheim Bell, welcome to the party, finally. 4 catches for 87 yards. 2 of his catches went for 27 or more yards, so big plays. Florida State ran the ball very effectively. 5.6 yards a carry, almost 200 yards. 75.2 PFF. Ben Sinout makes the list yet again for KSU. He had another nice game. KSU ran the ball like crazy, almost 300 rushing yards on 6 yards a carry, 6 catches for 72 yards, 81.6 PFF grade for Ben Sinout. He continues to be one of my favorite sleepers that is starting to creep up here. 2 new names to the list that I want to draw attention to. We have Trey Knox, who was playing with Spencer Rattler at SC. He had 8 catches against Florida for 50 yards. Very much a possession receiver, but 50 yards, I mean, that's still helping your team, especially if a lot of those catches go for first downs. South Carolina ran the ball effectively, 4.6 yards a carry, 73.9 PFF grade for Trey Knox. Somebody I'm starting to keep an eye on. Last guy, another new face, Theo Johnson of Penn State. He had 2 touchdown catches, 4 catches, 66 yards, solid game. Penn State ran for 250 yards, 6.6 yards a carry, 80.7 PFF grade. Just solid, effective all-around player. Interior offensive line now. We've got one new name to this list. I talked about him before the season started, but new name here, Tate Ratledge of Georgia. Georgia ran the ball all over Vanderbilt, 7.2 yards a carry, almost 300 rushing yards. He did allow 1 QB pressure on Beck, but his PFF grade was solid, 69.3. Cooper Bebe actually had his worst game of the year according to PFF, but KSU still ran the ball all over their opponent, and Cooper didn't allow any QB pressures, so I'm going to include him here. 272 rushing yards for KSU, 60.3 PFF grade. Brandon Coleman of TCU. TCU had an effective running game, 5.1 yards a carry. He allowed 1 QB pressure in this game, 69.4 PFF grade. He's more of a right guard, but I like what he's doing over there. He's somebody who I've had my eye on since before the season started. Jordan Morgan for Arizona. Arizona ran the ball well, 4.7 yards a carry, 175 yards. He did allow 2 QB pressures, including the 1 sack on the Arizona quarterback, Fifita. So he got beat a little bit in pass protection. Remember, he is playing left tackle. He may end up moving to guard in the NFL. It's unclear. 66.6 PFF grade. And this guy, PFF was not a fan of what he did this week, but I had to include him because I thought the performance, personally, looking at it, was pretty decent. Graham Barton of Duke, almost 200 rushing yards for Duke on 6.5 yards a carry. 1 sack on the quarterback, Bellin the fourth. Remember, Riley Leonard's injured. 1 QB pressure allowed by Graham Barton, not the sack, just 1 pressure. And somehow he gets a 54.2. I don't know if I buy it. But anyway, you can see that there are a couple of guys that are just kind of appearing on this list every week now, because every week it seems like they're bringing it to me. But it's nice to bring in a new name every now and then, like Tate Ratledge. Defensive line now. Let's switch on over to the defensive side of the ball. We've got Tyleik Williams, who makes his weekly appearance here. He's here every week because every week he's bringing it. He's one of the guys on OSU, along with Cade Stover, that I'm interested in. There are a lot of guys on OSU that haven't impressed me that much yet, but Tyleik Williams, he's grinding it out in the trenches. 3 tackles. 2 of his tackles went for a loss. He knocked down 2 passes at the line of scrimmage. 125 rushing yards allowed by Ohio State, but only 3.7 yards a carry. Ohio State allowed all of 260 total yards and 7 points. So great defensive effort. 72.3 PFF grade. So another really solid game from Tyleik Williams. This is the second week in a row I've introduced Justin Ebogbe of Alabama, the Crimson Tide. He had his second solid game in a row, 5 tackles, including half a tackle for loss, which was the half a sack. 2 QB pressures, 1 pass breakup at the line. Alabama allowed 100 rushing yards against Arkansas with KJ Jefferson. Pretty notable. 2.8 yards a carry. 250 total yards allowed to the Arkansas offense. 72.9 PFF grade. Solid, solid, solid. And then we got to give credit to another Oregon player here, Brandon Dorlus. I thought he played really well against Washington. He had 5 tackles, 1.5 for a loss. He had a sack, and it's very hard to sack Penix. He had 5 QB pressures. Monstrous. 1 pass deflection at the line. Oregon only allowed 99 rushing yards. 4.3 yards a carry is okay. Not the best, not the worst. 69.6 PFF grade. I had my eye on Brandon Dorlus as a potential 3rd-round guy, and I think his stock went up like this after that game against a really good team. Mekhi Wingo of LSU makes his appearance here. He's the other LSU defensive lineman, and honestly, I may end up liking him more than Mason Smith. He had 2 tackles, 1 for a loss. It was a sack, which was also his QB pressure. LSU allowed 140 rushing yards, 4.1 yards a carry, less than 300 total yards allowed, 18 points. And Wingo's grade from PFF was 72.9. Very, very good. So, Mekhi Wingo starting to make his move here. Has a chance to maybe be a day 2 pick, I think. McKinley Jackson's last guy here. Wasn't a crazy good week for defensive linemen, if we're being honest, but the Texas A&M guy caught my attention. He had a sack and 5 tackles and a 66 PFF grade for a Texas A&M defense that played relatively well this week, I would say. I think they stopped the run quite well. And that's it for the defensive line. Moving on to linebacker here, looking for the good linebackers this week. Smael Mondon Jr. has started to make a move for Georgia. 6 tackles, including 1 for a loss, which was a sack. 2 QB pressures, so he's doing some stuff on the blitz. 18 rushing yards allowed the whole game by Georgia's defense. So Georgia's defense was absolutely lights out against the run. 219 total yards allowed. Mondon did get lit up in coverage in this game. 57 coverage yards allowed. But even with that, his PFF grade was solid, 65. It's not great, but it's effective. And he's probably my favorite of the Georgia linebackers. I'll say that. He's quickly become the guy who I think is better of those two. Tommy Eichenberg is starting to make a good move for OSU. He played a good game, his second good game in a row, I think. 8 tackles, 1 for a loss, 2 QB pressures. Ohio State had an effective run defense, 3.7 yards a carry. And 250 total yards allowed, 70.6 PFF grade. Just a solid all-around game from Eichenberg as he continues to recover. Going to give it up to Cedric Gray as well. He had one of his better games of the year. 10 tackles, 1 for a loss. Pass breakup, an interception. So making plays in coverage for UNC. 91 rushing yards allowed by UNC, 3.4 yards a carry. And they were playing a good team this week. It was Miami. Only 13 allowed coverage yards, 73.7 PFF grade. This guy's really starting to round into shape here. It seems like every week he's making multiple big plays for the UNC defense. Curtis Jacobs of Penn State. Penn State's defense is just so dominant. They need some representation here. Curtis Jacobs himself had a normal game. 5 tackles, 1 for a loss. Penn State, 64 rushing yards allowed, 1.6 yards a carry. They allowed 109 yards the whole game. Now, they were playing Massachusetts. I'm not acting like it's the big deal, but you play who you play. They didn't allow any points. Curtis Jacobs allowed 16 yards in coverage, 71.5 PFF grade. He continues to kind of be a late riser for me. I wasn't really looking at him that much before the season, but he's got some good qualities. Junior Colson of Michigan, 6 tackles and a QB pressure. Michigan played lights out defense. 92 rushing yards allowed, less than 3 yards a carry. 232 total yards allowed, 7 points allowed. Colson only had 6 coverage yards allowed the whole game. Now, his grade was not very good, 57. Don't really know where that came from, honestly. I think he missed 1 tackle, but on the whole, I don't see how the star linebacker on a team that plays like this can be that far down. All right, now we're going to safety here. I found 5 safeties that stood out to me positively. Rod Moore of Michigan leads off here. I already went over how dominant Michigan's defensive performance was, but Rod Moore had 2 tackles and a pick. He returned almost 40 yards. He allowed 10 yards total in coverage, 72.6 PFF grade. He's not the best. He's not among the best safeties in this draft, but I do believe he's going to go in that 2nd or 3rd round and be valuable there. Cole Bishop for Utah had 6 tackles, picked up a fumble. Utah's defense held their opponent to under 260 yards, 14 points. His PFF grade was just meh, 56.5, but I thought he played good. Jack Howell of Colorado State. That crazy end. By the way, if you haven't seen it, go check it out. Colorado State erased a 20-point lead in like 5 minutes or something. 15 tackles and a pass breakup and only allowed 2 yards in coverage. Really solid game from him, I think. Colorado State only gave up a bunch of points because their offense was really bad for most of the game. Cameron Kinchins for Miami. Not a great game for Miami, but I thought he played well. 9 tackles, 2 for a loss, including a sack. 2 pass deflections. He did allow 62 yards in coverage, but I thought that when you're playing Drake May, that's going to happen. And then you've got Tyke Smith of UGA, another Georgia safety, showing up here with 5 tackles, 2 pressures, and a pick on a great game for Georgia. Now, he did allow 90 yards in coverage, which is most of the yards that Georgia allowed, which is a little bit alarming, maybe. It's not great. But Tyke Smith is another Georgia defensive back who I think is going to start getting some attention here. And him making a big play like getting that interception and doing some stuff on the blitz is going to move him in that direction. All right, so that's about it for this week. It was a really good week for quarterbacks, by the way. There were some quarterbacks I left off that could have easily been put here, like Jaden Daniels could have been here again. Honestly, with Jaden Daniels, it's getting kind of like he puts up those numbers every week, but if he's putting up the numbers, right? The numbers are there. I'm not inventing them. I'm not making them up. He's putting up those numbers. There were a couple other quarterbacks that I thought played really well this week. Honestly, like Tyler Dyke played really well, but he threw 2 interceptions. Drake May played really well, but he completed less than half his passes. So there were like flaws in their games for sure. Also, if we're being honest, we shouldn't even be talking about Drake May because we're not going to be able to get him. But whatever. If he plays good, we're going to talk about it at least a little bit. But they had really good but flawed games. So impressive week for the quarterbacks, I think. These other positions, it's getting a little bit tougher, admittedly, because there are fewer games every week. But we do what we can, and I think it's going to be a really good draft class. I'm excited for this draft class. I like where it's going. And yeah, that's all I got for this video. See you guys later today. More videos coming. Go Hawks and bow down to Washington all at once.